All aircraft have a shelf life. They fly as far as they can for as long as they can, and then they're retired from service to be replaced by new planes. At that point, they're usually either broken down and used for scrap, or locked away in a hangar somewhere. That isn't the story of every plane, though. Some of them are doomed to abandonment, and they often end up that way long before their time. If you wanted to go looking for forgotten old planes, we guess a forgotten old airfield is a good place to start looking. The oldest airfield in Moscow, Russia, was at the Kinka Aerodrome. It closed long ago, but someone forgot to shift the old planes that were still landing on it when it closed down. The airfield first opened in October 1910, back at the dawn of aviation itself. The first ever Russian international flight took off from here in May 1922. In 2003, after almost a century of service, it was closed down, and every plane still standing on the land at that time was abandoned. The planes are still there today, and are even visible on Google Earth. Many of them are classics of Russian aviation history. You'll find Sukhoi Su-17 fighters, MiG-25Pu Foxbats, MiG-21s, Yakovlev Yak-25s, and many more old planes from the Soviet era rusting away, exposed to the elements. The site doesn't appear to be guarded, and so anyone can walk in and take pictures like the ones you see here. Apparently, the land has been earmarked for a housing development, but that was back in 2010, and there doesn't appear to be any progress made on that front yet. Sticking with the theme of Soviet creations, would it be more accurate to call this next abandoned vessel a plane or a ship? We'll let you decide. It's an MD-160 Lune-class ekranoplane, built in the 1970s. Also known as an Ukra, this monstrous vessel is even bigger than a Boeing 747. Rather than taking off high into the sky, the Ukra was designed to fly on an air cushion around 15 feet above sea level, which would have made it extremely difficult for enemy vessels to detect on approach. Nobody knows the precise details of what it got up to while it was still in service, but it was retired during the 1990s and stored at Kaspiysk Naval Base. More recently, it's been transported across the Caspian Sea to reach Derbent in Dagestan, where it's scheduled to be turned into a museum. This singular ekranoplane is understood to be the only model completed before the Soviet Union had to shut down its WIC program because of a lack of funds. While it's difficult to imagine a vessel of this size sneaking up on anybody, its low clearance above the water, coupled with its supersonic missiles, meant that by the time an enemy vessel saw it, it would already be too late. Speaking of boats that could also fly, the Dornier Do X was the world's biggest, heaviest, and most powerful flying boat when it took off for the first time in 1929. This vessel was so enormous that it was nicknamed the Flying Palace. Claude Dornier came up with the basic design of his colossal creation in 1924 and started building work in 1925. But it took 4 years and 240,000 combined working hours to get it finished. Technically speaking, Germany shouldn't have been allowed to build any aircraft capable of the speed or range of the Dornier Do X under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War. But Germany got around that by having the work carried out just over the border in Switzerland. The public was hugely impressed by the vessel, which was designed to carry passengers, but a combination of high costs and frequent accidents meant only 3 units were ever built. It couldn't fly very high, with a maximum altitude of 1,400 feet, but it was an impressive thing to see in the air. It's thought that the last remaining example of the Do X was destroyed by a British Royal Air Force raid during the Second World War. When a United States Navy Douglas R-4D8 transport plane came to a crashing halt on Solheimasonder Beach in Iceland in November 1973, the incident was blamed on severe icing. When the unlikelihood of that was pointed out, the next excuse was that the plane had somehow run out of fuel. It took years for the true cause to be identified. It was a simple case of human error. The plane's first fuel tank had indeed run dry, but there was a second one available, and the pilot simply neglected to switch to it. Almost 50 years later, the old American plane is still there on the distinctive black sand of this Icelandic beach, where it's become a well-known landmark and tourist attraction. Because non-Icelandic tourists often struggle to pronounce the word Sólheimasöndur, it's become better known as the Black Sands crash site. While it's still an impressive sight to see after a long hike to the beach, it's not quite as impressive as it used to be. The plane is missing its tail section and secondary fuel tank, both of which are said to have been cut away and stolen by a local farmer. In March 2001, the Greek authorities decided that the old central airport in Athens, the country's capital city, was no longer fit for purpose. They closed it down, and they accidentally turned it into a time capsule in the process. There were still several Olympic Airway carrier jets standing on the runway when the day of closure arrived, and they're still there 20 years later. This airport is called Hellinikon, and was once a major European transport gateway after opening in the 1930s. It was supposed to be replaced by a metropolitan park, but the Greek financial crisis of the early 21st century put that idea to a halt. The future of the airport is still uncertain, and because of that, so are the ultimate fates of all the planes that still stand here, still wearing the livery of the long-dead airline they once flew for. All of them were made by Boeing. There are Boeing 737s, Boeing 727s, and even an impressive Boeing 747-200. Olympic Airlines, founded by Aristotle Onassis in 1957, was once known all over the world for the standard of luxury aboard its planes, which included gilded cutlery and crystal glasses for mealtimes. Now, the last of its once proud fleet is rusting away in the sun. Our next abandoned plane used to be unknown even to the people who lived closest to it, until pictures of it went viral on the internet in 2018. Now it's become a popular destination for adventurous hikers in Trinidad and Tobago. The plane is a wrecked Piper PA-23 Aztec, stuck on a mountainside in Chaguaramas on Trinidad. According to the records of the Aviation Safety Network, the plane was flying from Alexander Hamilton Airport in St. Croix, bound for Piarco International Airport, when it came down in 1975 with 2 people on board. Both of them are understood to have survived the emergency landing. Nobody paid it much attention until hiker Glenn Wilkes took pictures of the wreck and posted them to his social media accounts in 2018, after which a steady stream of similarly minded hikers have turned up in Trinidad to see it with their own eyes. Visitors are warned to resist the temptation to climb inside the wreck for photo opportunities because what's left of the plane sits on a steep incline, and it might one day slip down the side of the mountain. Nobody would want to be inside it at the time. The Second World War necessitated the construction of many new military airfields in the United Kingdom, and not all of them remained in service for very long. One of them is Pronach Airfield in Cornwall, which was attacked by the German Luftwaffe 3 years after it became operational and was then abandoned. Today, we can think of it as a plane graveyard, covered in broken jets and burned-out helicopters. The distinctive logo of the British Royal Air Force is still visible on the side of many of the planes, including an SA Jetstream T2 and an English Electric Canberra. For those who are more interested in helicopters, there's a Sea King and a Westland Lynx. One of the dilapidated Sea Kings lays on its side, and elsewhere there's a Hawker Siddeley Domini plane with a collapsed wing. Over the years since the airfield was abandoned, it's occasionally been used for military fire and rescue training, so some of the vehicles that escaped the Nazi bombs went on to be damaged by their own side during those training exercises. Pronach is theoretically off-limits to the public, but that doesn't seem to stop urban explorers from gaining access regularly to take pictures like these. On 19th November 1946, a Douglas C-53 Skytrooper crashed onto the Guasi Glacier in the Swiss Bernese Alps. Despite the violent nature of the crash, none of the 8 passengers aboard were seriously injured. The crash and subsequent rescue operation was a media sensation and is considered to be the greatest alpine rescue achievement of the decade. The plane had taken off from Vienna in Austria and was bound for Pisa in Italy when bad weather forced it off course. The pilot and crew became disoriented among the Alpine peaks and then got caught up in a katabatic wind, sending it crashing into the glacier at 170 miles per hour with so much force that it slid upwards, embedding itself in snow and ice at a height of just under 11,000 feet. The crew believed they'd come down in the French Alps rather than the Swiss Alps, which slowed down the rescue operation as it made the crashed plane hard to find. Flight Lieutenant Geoffrey Douglas Head of the British Royal Air Force, piloting an Avro Lancaster, eventually sighted the wreck through a gap in the clouds 2 days later. The U.S. Army arrived on a train with snowcats and Wiley's MB Jeeps, but were unable to reach the stranded passengers, who were eventually rescued by Swiss soldiers. When the USA and its allies invaded Iraq in 2003, Saddam Hussein ordered his military planes to be dispersed beyond the perimeters of his air bases, in the hope that they would avoid taking damage during air raids and could then be brought back into service after the Americans left. It was a vain hope. The invasion crushed Hussein's regime, and most of the planes were eventually found and destroyed anyway. The ones we see here used to belong to the Al-Bakir Air Base, which is now known as Joint Base Balad. They're all MiG-23s, and they were all dragged back inside the base after the initial phase of the military operation came to an end. Many of them have been covered in graffiti by bored American soldiers, as have the disused T-72 tanks that surround them. While the entire Iraqi fleet of MiG-25 fighters was disassembled before being hidden in the desert, these MiG-23s were left intact. It's possible that they were intended to be scrambled back into service at the first available opportunity. Looking at the state of them today, it's obvious that they'll never fly again. Americans must have a thing about spray painting disused warplanes, because here's another collection of them. This grounded fleet looks a lot prettier than the graffiti-tagged MiG-23s in Iraq. You'll find it in Arizona, USA, where they're part of the state's famous U.S. Air Force boneyard. 30 world-renowned graffiti artists were invited to come and paint these old Air Force jets as part of the art-focused Boneyard project in 2011. Initially, only the nose cones of the old planes were painted, but within a year, the work had spread to the entire aircraft, including a Douglas DC-3 that's covered in paint from nose to tail. Perhaps the most spectacular of the planes at the site is an old Lockheed Jetstar, which now features a combination of brick patterns, concentric circles, and psychedelic swirling patterns. It's been renamed Spy Tiger by Andrew Schultz, the artist responsible for the work. Some of the more basic designs were painted and completed in just a few hours, but the more complicated examples took weeks. There are over 4,000 planes stationed at the boneyard, so there's plenty of canvas space to go at if the artists are ever invited back. This old Ilyushin IL-76 cargo plane, baking in the desert heat in the United Arab Emirates, is the source of a great deal of controversy. It started life as a Soviet military plane, built in Uzbekistan during the 1970s, and remaining in service until the collapse of the Soviet Union at the beginning of the 1990s. From there, it was sold on to a small aviation company called Airses. Airses is a notorious name in the world of aviation. During its short existence, it was charged with over 100 violations of civil aviation law, with the last of those charges coming in 1998. By 2001, the company had been disbanded. That isn't even the most controversial thing about the company. Its owner was the brother of notorious illegal arms dealer Victor Bout, and Victor himself is thought to have been involved in the running of Airses, even though his name didn't appear on any official documents. Bout is officially banned from entering the UAE, and his brother is banned along with him. That makes the plane effectively ownerless, as its owners can't come and collect it, and the airline it belonged to no longer exists. As it's now 50 years old, it's probably useless anyway, but someone probably ought to take it away and scrap it. You probably didn't expect to see a relic of the USSR standing on an airfield in the UAE. You'd probably be even more surprised to find old Soviet relics in the Caribbean. And yet, here they are at Pearls Airport in Grenada. The airport was the first to be built in Grenada and doesn't see much in the way of use today, save for the cows and goats that graze upon the overgrown fields. These old Soviet planes are a strange sight standing on the land and are relics of a military campaign that few people remember today, even though it was comparatively recent. Grenada declared independence from the United Kingdom in 1974, and quickly thereafter became a communist state. Because of its proximity to the United States of America and the rapidly escalating tensions of the Cold War, that put the US government on high alert. The USA invaded Grenada in October 1983 and grounded these planes, most of which are old Soviet crop dusters. Even now, the letters CCCP are still just about visible on their fuselages. The communist era in Grenada is now long forgotten, but these old planes still stand as evidence that it happened. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!